Thank you for the intro. Can everyone hear me all right? All right. So thanks for the intro. I'm Mike, CTO at IMMUNIO. And the secret about this talk is I'm actually really not going to talk about the LinkedIn hack at all. It's really about how the LinkedIn hack affects every other website on the internet. I have some time at the end for questions, but if you guys have any questions as we go through, just shout it out and we'll answer. Don't be afraid. I did a little informal poll of my own password manager the other day, and I have about, this is in air quotes, this is 66 different usernames and passwords that I've got stored for various sites across the internet, as I'm sure you guys all do. And I kind of saw that number and thought that seems pretty high. I should probably be looking at some way of reducing or managing or single sign-oning all this stuff. But actually, it's quite low by the average. If you look, US users tend to have 130 different usernames and passwords that they have to keep around in their head, or if they're being clever, a password manager. If you're not using password managers, I encourage you all to start right away. Because I don't know about you, but I can't really remember 130 different passwords for 130 different websites. And hackers are counting on that. They're counting on you to choose weak passwords. They're counting on you to reuse your passwords between sites, so that when a big site like LinkedIn has a big password database dump, they can go through that list and find usernames and passwords that you used on LinkedIn and test them on pretty much every other site out there on the internet to find those ones that you've reused. And there's lots of different reasons they're doing this. But this is kind of an attack that I think is interesting because your sites are becoming more vulnerable because of somebody else's hack, somebody else's breach. It's now affecting you, even though you may have done nothing wrong with your site. You might not have any vulnerabilities, but now your site has become more vulnerable because of a breach at LinkedIn or many others. So why are hackers interested in this stuff? These aren't accounts that control your system access. It's not your database root password that lets them steal your data. It's not your SSH credentials. These are passwords of the users of your site. But there's lots of different reasons why hackers might want to get into there. One of the big ones, and probably the original ones, is financial fraud and theft. If an attacker can get into one of your customers, if you're an e-commerce site, they might be able to purchase goods and have them shipped to their address. If you're a banking site, then they might be able to just directly steal funds, transfer them away. Obviously, anything that equates closely to money or high-value items is going to be an immediate motivation for an attacker. There's an interesting variation of this. I think it was around the end of last year with Fitbit. Anybody have a Fitbit in the audience? So they were getting this attack technique, account takeover, where the attackers were trying to breach their accounts. And maybe you're not so careful with your Fitbit password. It's not your banking website. It's not your email. It's just, you know, counting how many steps you take and your fitness. So maybe you don't have a very strong password. Maybe you reuse your passwords. The attackers were going after Fitbit accounts. And as soon as they got an account, as soon as they found one that they could access, they would go in and they would change the address, change the phone number, change the email address, basically just take over that account. And then go through the warranty process and say, hey, my Fitbit's not working. The screen's dead, whatever. And Fitbit, wanting to keep their customers happy and fit, they just sent them a new one. And of course, they sent it to the account on file, right? The address that they had in their system. And it went directly to the attacker. Well, probably not directly. I'm pretty sure they went through some way to not have the police show up at their door. But the attackers got these brand new Fitbits, sold them on eBay or wherever for half price. Fitbit loses out on money. Attackers earn lots of money. And the Fitbit customers are kind of the ones left in the lurch because with their actually working Fitbit, they can't access their account anymore. So now Fitbit's got this double problem of unhappy customers because they can't access the Fitbit site, and they're losing Fitbits because they're sending them out to the wrong people. As I'm sure everyone here knows, attackers are pretty adept at finding ways to convert security vulnerabilities into cash money. Another big one is any kind of virtual currency. And this could be things like Bitcoin or Zcash or whatever. Sorry, I'm Canadian. Zcash, is it? I don't know. Also like loyalty point programs, frequent flyer miles, hotel loyalty point systems. These are all things that can be monetized by an attacker that maybe aren't quite as well protected as they should be. I don't know if you've logged on to loyalty point systems for hotels in particular, but I've got a couple, and their websites are, whether they're vulnerable or not, they're pretty bad and dated. I think you would probably all agree. And probably don't really have the security that they should. There was a great example talking to a security manager at a hotel I won't name, where hackers had managed to breach into the loyalty point system. And what they were doing is collecting these loyalty points from breached accounts. And they had people who would work behind the front desk, an accomplice work behind the front desk. And they were actually using the loyalty points to book hotel rooms, to run an escort service out of the hotel where they would book the rooms and people would go and use the rooms for I don't know what, and entirely funded by these hotel loyalty point systems. Because they're stolen, they kind of have a pseudo-anonymity, and because they've got somebody behind the front desk, they're not checking real IDs. So yet again, a way to monetize something that might not be strictly cash. And of course, the little 8-bit gifts there, any kind of in-game currency, hugely valuable these days. Gaming finance is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So ways of stealing cash out of virtual games or high-value items, high-value accounts, high-value characters leveled up. There's big business in that for attackers. The old one that nobody likes is just simple spam. Most websites have gotten pretty good. They've had to get pretty good at effective spam control. Anything where you've got comments or forms. And one of the big things that they do is control new accounts. They put limits on accounts that are newly created as to what they can post. Or the posts get reviewed by a moderator before they actually appear. So that's kind of helped control the spread of spam. But if an attacker can start stealing accounts of existing users, they're getting into accounts that have existing reputations, existing connections on whatever site it is, and likely accounts that have surpassed the age or trust level to post unfiltered comments. So yet again, finding ways to squeeze in more spam into our daily lives. Another one that's becoming bigger, and this has kind of happened to Twitter a fair bit, is just political motivations or just general wanting to influence. These are a few actual tweets from accounts that have been compromised through account takeover. And you know, these aren't small accounts. Skype, major news outlets, Taylor Swift even. I mean, that one got noticed like that as soon as something came up. There's even been a lot of tweets coming up with the election process that we're in now. And I was trying to collect a few of them, but some of the most interesting ones, it turns out they were real, so yeah. And like I said at the beginning, all of these breaches, these hacks that are happening, aren't really the fault of the websites being hacked, or at least not directly. You know, LinkedIn lost their credential database. Dropbox lost a credential database. Obviously, Yahoo is the big one lately. But all of these other ones are in the headlines, and these are major news about passwords being reset, breaches happening, major password attacks. These sites don't have SQL injection vulnerability. Well, they probably do, but this isn't what the hack is about. They don't have, these aren't XSSs being exploited. That's not command injections. It's just the fact that their accounts, their users are reusing passwords from one of these other breaches. So these sites are kind of getting drawn into the aftermath of somebody else's breach. And the interesting thing is, it's almost like a cumulative effect. The LinkedIn breach, we kind of hear about it a lot this year, but it actually happened, I think it was 2014. So it's not fresh, new data, but by the nature of people and password reuse and weak passwords, it doesn't matter if it's old data. So every time there's a breach, there's new username and password combinations being added to the collective database that exists out there. And attackers are taking all of the new data, even if it's actually a few years old, and testing them on all sorts of other sites. And they're finding more and more matches just because there's more and more things to try. So this is a problem that's not really going to just get better on its own when people make their sites more secure. It's going to be sort of a cumulative effect where it keeps getting more and more and more dangerous for websites operating. So I'm going to go through a couple of the techniques that are actually used for account takeover. Some of them are a bit more visible in the news lately, but some of them have been around for ages. So I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit on each one. Credential stuffing is really the root of the problem that I explained earlier. Some site has a big breach, and now there's lots of usernames and passwords floating around on the internet. The attacker simply gets the list, and Pastebin is a great source. It's kind of scary how many leaked dumps come out on Pastebin. If you're not aware of it, there's a great Twitter account, Dumpmon, and it just basically trawls Pastebin and some other sites. And anytime it finds something that looks like a credential dump, it just tweets about it. And a lot of these get taken down pretty quickly because Pastebin tries to reduce them. But this site kind of, if you can spot them right away, you can take a look, see what sort of data is in there. This is one that I actually faked for the presentation, so I'm not actually sharing anyone's real details here. But you don't have to look very hard to find some that are floating around. And there's many other sources. And it's relying on that fact that statistically 50% of users reuse passwords on multiple websites. So again, maybe not your core important websites that you care a lot about, but some hotel loyalty point system or something like that. Maybe you've got like one or two passwords that you kind of use for these less important sites. Well, if one of those less important sites gets breached, then they could potentially get access to all of them. And because it's not really a coding vulnerability, many sites don't have any real protection against this type of attack, because it's just using the normal behavior of your website. People logging in and sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, but it's the normal operation of your website. They're just using your website to check all these credentials, and when they find ones that work, they go ahead and do all that nasty stuff we talked about. And it's not a small problem. This is from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. And of all these different attack vectors affecting websites, credential reuse or use of stolen credentials is the #1. And it's been the #1 for a few years. This is not a new phenomenon. It's coming into the news a lot more lately because of the high-profile breaches. But this problem's been around for a while, and it's not really fixing itself. It really kind of started with the Adobe breach from 2013. And Michael Coates wrote a good blog, and I believe, as far as I understand, coined the term credential stuffing. and really identified that it's not so much Adobe who's at risk from this leaked password dump. They know what got leaked, and they can reset all the passwords. It's every other site on the internet. And that's been the case for every high-profile breach. And if you haven't seen Have I Been Pwned, great website. I grabbed a screenshot, and this is actually already out of date, on some of the top ones. And this is only like the first third of a very long page. So check it out if you haven't seen it. There's many, many. And what it all adds up to is billions of passwords out there, usernames and passwords that are relatively easy to access for attackers, that they can then go and scan every site on the internet. And they do. We've seen huge attacks. So many attempts to log in that sometimes it can actually affect the performance of websites. Yeah, so question for the video is there a way to search like a username database of who are these credentials? Can I find out if one of them is me, perhaps? And that's exactly what this website does. You can go in, you can register your own email address, or if you're a company and you verify your domain extension, you can register your whole company so that you get notified if anyone from your company's domain shows up on one of these lists. I won't assert to anyone that you should trust on the internet, but the way it's set up is relatively good. Yeah. It's not one of those, type in your username and password and we'll tell you if it's been breached. Yeah. In my personal threat risk analysis, I figure that my email address is in enough places that I don't mind putting it in here, if it means that I might get notified if they think my password's in there. But you each can manage that risk level yourself. Yeah, exactly. So this site is very much about looking if your credentials are out there floating around. But, and actually we'll look later on in the presentation at some tools that attackers are using for these types of attacks. And part of that is they actually have a community of sharing configurations for attacking websites. So these services that can kind of look for your company in all of the dark web can also find things like that, configurations for that. Yes, that's right. And they do an email verification step where they'll send you an email and you have to click on the link to verify that you are actually that person. The Ashley Madison leak was a great one for security people everywhere because it's one of those things that really hits home. I don't care if my bank has to send me a new credit card. It's annoying, but it's not a big deal. They'll handle the financial transaction loss. But if your name is in the Ashley Madison dump, then that has bigger repercussions than just getting a new credit card. So that one definitely hit home for a lot of people. Question in the back.
Why is there no Facebook?
So why is there no Facebook? I'm not responsible for the list. Like I said, this is the first third of the page. So it's possible they might be just under our 2 games accounts there, or I'm not sure. Check it out yourself. Yeah. I think it could be a good sign, but
or they pay them happily not to.
I don't know how much it would cost to have your name removed from the list, but check yourselves to see if Facebook is on the list. Probably most people in the room have Facebook accounts. As always, I would say, don't reuse your passwords, and most importantly, don't be one of these people here. So this was from a breach a little while ago. People have been doing these sorts of analyses on breaches as they happen. So that's kind of a positive aspect of a big password dump is they can then look at the dump and, you know, if they've got millions of accounts with passwords, they can do an analysis and say how many are weak. So this was a dump from a few years ago. I've also read information that in more recent dumps, this is actually improving, which is awesome. But yeah, if you look, I mean, top 2 passwords make up 5% of the total users on that site. That means for any user account, or if you could get a big list of users, chances are 5% of them you'd get with just trying 2 passwords. If you've got any of those passwords, change them now, right? And there are, I guess, I'm going to say more traditional, although password reuse is also very traditional. But lots of other people at this conference are talking about some of the very big coding level vulnerabilities. And I don't focus on them much in this talk, but clearly, if you're the one getting hacked, then these things are of prime concern. So don't be the source of these leaked password databases. So guard against this. Another little fact from the Verizon data breach investigation report. 99.9% of exploited vulnerabilities were understood, known about, published for over a year. That's pretty much all of them. So keep an eye on what vulnerabilities are out there and patch them. All the ones we've kind of talked up to now, all the techniques, have been attackers accessing your site to either steal your credentials directly or test credentials from some other site. But they're touching your web presence. So you have a chance of stopping them from gathering these credentials or verifying them. But the next ones are, again, nothing new, but just slightly different in that it's kind of totally out of your control. Somebody mentioned Facebook. Here you've got a website that looks kind of like Facebook, but obviously if you look a little bit closer, it's not. These phishing scams, well, 23% of recipients open messages, and then 11% click on attachments, no less. So not even just links. Again, from the Verizon data breach investigation report, this is a problem that's not going away. And an interesting one that I like is, malware that's actually going after your password manager's password. And this is old as well. This is 2014, I think. So if you use a password manager, you have to be careful of your password manager as well, because it's got all your passwords. So there's no question that this is a hard problem to be safe against, and it's hard for websites to protect against. So I wanted to go over now a couple ways of protecting yourselves from these attacks. And I'll go through each one of these, but there's quite a few ways. And you'll see in some of the bigger websites, they've implemented most of these. And because of this, you really don't hear much about breaches on these sites or problems with credential stuffing. But I'm going to go through them all here. First off, strengthen your login process on your site. If you're hosting a website, make it possible to do multi-factor authentication. If it's a high-value site, if you're a bank or financial institution, you might want to consider making it mandatory for your customers to use two-factor authentication. It could be lots of different ways. SMS verification is popular. Sites that also have apps often use that. I'm a big fan of the TOTP tokens with like a YubiKey device or something like that, or the new U2F standard that's supported by, I think, Chrome and Firefox now, but it makes it very easy. You get like a little USB stick like this. You stick it in your computer. When you log onto the website, the little light just starts blinking, and you just tap the button, and you've done two-factor authentication. It's an open standard, so it's easy to add to your website. Whatever technique or method you choose, I just recommend choose something and make it available.
So we're going back to the days of dongles where you have to
I'll take a dongle any day if it makes it secure. That is one of the big reasons I do like and can't really promote more, the U2F standard. One of the things I like the most about it is it lets you use one dongle for many different websites. So today it's supported on of the sites that I'm aware of. Gmail uses it, Dropbox, GitHub. So these are all sites that I use fairly often, and it makes it really, really easy. With that one dongle, I can authenticate my two-factor auth to all of these websites. And it's architected in such a way, you could do a whole other talk on just that, but it's architected in such a way that it avoids a lot of common problems with shared tokens of one site being able to identify that you're a member of another site, or identifying that this account in Google is the same as this account in Google. They've organized it in such a way that it's very resistant to those sorts of privacy implications of using a shared token. Yes, absolutely. The phone apps are very good as well. If you trust your phone, you've got Google Authenticator is probably one of the big common ones for TOTP tokens. There's also, I'm not going to do justice to listing them all, but lots of apps like Duo. Help me out here. There are other apps. Auth0, I think. Anyway, there's lots of other apps where they can coordinate all this authentication on your phone. Again, I'm not going to recommend one over the other. I just encourage you, if you're creating a website, provide at least one option for multi-factor authentication so that your customers who want to have that extra level of security have the option at least. Also, don't limit how long the passwords can be or characters. Like, don't do that stuff. Just let people pick strong passwords as well. The next aspect is you're trying to prevent accounts from being compromised, but the reality of the world is that it's going to happen. Some of this stuff can happen completely out of your control, phishing attacks, malware. So have some kind of a plan B approach where if you can identify an attack or an account that you think is compromised, what do you do then? If you've got a website that you only identify your customers with a username and a password, and you think that username and a password is compromised, how can you connect with that customer and tell them to reset their password or block their account until they reset their password? Have some sort of a plan B approach that you can take if you need to, if some of your customers show up in these leaked databases and things like that. So it doesn't have to be fancy. Even if you've got a verified email address for this user, that you can do an email password reset flow. There's lots of kind of interesting techniques used by some social networking sites. I think Facebook does or used to do this, where they'd show you some pictures and they'd say, who's this person? And who's this person? Are you friends with this person? Maybe you've got some details of your customers in that way that you could use some existing data to verify, but have some method of dealing with these things when they happen. For the attacks where people are using large volumes, like these credential stuffing attacks, brute force attacks, the attacker has to send a lot of login attempts to your website. They have to try to log in many times with all those billions of breached passwords in hopes that, 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million, one of those ones will succeed. And because of that, they have to try a lot of times. So this automated behavior, it's not going to be a human typing in every one of these passwords. It's going to be some sort of a bot or a script. So add in some support for CAPTCHAs. That's the standard tool for stopping bots from accessing your site. Difficult for a bot to bypass, but easy, annoying for a human. So the usual balance is you probably don't want to show a CAPTCHA to every single login to your site. Maybe that's OK, and you can, and that's actually a fairly easy way to do it. But most sites don't want to do that because humans find them annoying and frustrating. So the balancing act is trying to be smart about showing the CAPTCHA to some login requests, but not showing it to human login requests. Some CAPTCHAs, even as a fully fledged human, I cannot solve them. I don't know if I'm just not human enough, or maybe there's around computers too much. I don't know. But yeah, the Google reCAPTCHA service is pretty good. You've probably all seen these. Often you just click the box and it turns green and you're good to go. Sometimes it's not so sure about you, so it pops up something where you have to, I don't know, click on all the pictures of a truck or a flower or something. I don't know the full details on how this is implemented and how it works in the background. I've heard lots of people who've either looked at it or speculated on it, but a lot of it, they say, is the browser itself. And I'll talk a little bit more about browser profiling in general, but this is running a bit of JavaScript in the browser. And that JavaScript can do lots of stuff. And it can query APIs that exist in browsers and verify that they're getting back what they expect to get back. Some simple things like they're just looking, what's the screen resolution? What's the color depth? What plugins are installed? What's the user agent string? And it can gather up a lot of things like this and send it off to Google. Google, verifies it all and sends it back and say, yeah, that seems like a human. I've also heard people say that it uses a lot of other Google authentication services, like in the background. So if I'm logged into my Gmail account and it knows that I've had that account for, 5 years, it'll say, well, it looks like the same guy is logged into Gmail, and we know him, he's trustworthy, so probably he's OK to solve this CAPTCHA. Again, I'm not sure how much of that is true or accurate, but these are some things that I've heard. As far as I know, it's a bit more than that happens in the background from just clicking the box. I do know. Yeah, uses your camera. You've got a good face, honest looking. Yeah. That's another question. An often traded off thing between privacy versus security dilemma. So yes, CAPTCHA. Good defense, but you want to try to deploy it selectively. So a common technique is rate limiting. Because these attackers have to have a huge volume of login attempts, like millions, they're going to be sending a lot of requests. And a normal user on your site probably, well, maybe they forget their password. They try once, they try twice, they try 3 times. They're probably not going to try 10,000 times or even 10 times. So if you can add in a thresholding system, usually keyed off the IP address, the source of the traffic, then you can basically say if one IP address fails to log in more than 10 times in an hour or a day, you set up that threshold. If it exceeds that threshold, then I'm going to start showing that IP address the CAPTCHA. If it's a company or a school or some other place where lots of people are sharing an IP address, maybe you'll hit that limit unintentionally, like just from normal traffic. But in the worst case scenario, you're really just showing them a CAPTCHA. So you're not actually blocking them from using the site. You're just raising the kind of risk profile of that IP address to make them solve a CAPTCHA before they proceed. So your good users still go in, but maybe if it's a bot, it gets stopped. Now, attackers aren't standing still through all of this. They're testing your site, and they're noticing things like rate limits. So they're working at ways around rate limits. And one of the easiest ways, and this not so much for credential stuffing, but has been big lately, is botnets. So now instead of trying from one IP address, they're using your DVRs and video cameras at home to now come at this site from hundreds of thousands of different IP addresses. So now one IP address might only send a login attempt 2 or 3 times a day, well below your threshold for a normal user. But the attacker is able to leverage hundreds of thousands of individual IP addresses at relatively low cost. So now your rate limiting doesn't really work because they're still able to test, potentially millions of passwords a day without triggering your rate limit, so they're not getting the CAPTCHA. So that's, win one for the attacker. So the next defense that I recommend is trying to leverage some threat intelligence data from other sources. So if somebody's got a botnet of compromised machines with hundreds of thousands of unique IP addresses, chances are good that they're not just using that botnet to attack your one website. They're probably doing a bunch of bad stuff with it. And what's becoming very common these days is the person who created and manages the botnet actually just rents it out. They rent time on the botnet. So those same IP addresses might be doing credential stuffing on other websites, or they might be doing vulnerability scans, or they might be knocking Dyn DNS off the internet, or what was the most recent one, actually trying to deny all internet access to like an entire country. I think Libya, they're trying to, for some reason, knock them off the internet. So these IP addresses are doing other bad stuff. And other websites, other sources on the internet will collect that data, aggregate it, and publish it for you in these threat intelligence feeds. And there's lots of commercial ones and lots of open source ones or free open data ones. There's other things that are not necessarily an indicator of an attacker, but maybe something you might want to be a little bit more wary about, like Tor exit nodes. But collect all this stuff together and use these IP addresses to guide your CAPTCHA serving. So if somebody's on one of these lists, again, you don't necessarily need to block them, but maybe serve them a CAPTCHA. Oh yeah, so do you see an attack happening just based on the volume of attempts? And yeah, absolutely. And I don't show any kind of charts here, but as part of your normal monitoring, your security monitoring, you can be looking at this stuff, looking at the failed login attempts. And if you see a big spike, chances are good that you're under attack. And maybe your CAPTCHA service is just as a matter of saying, I think I'm under attack, so I'm going to start showing that to everyone. But having that technique to selectively show the CAPTCHA is whatever that technique is common. I touched on this one a little bit for the reCAPTCHA when we were talking about it, but your browsers are very complex pieces of software. So if you can put a little bit of JavaScript in that browser and query a few of those APIs like I mentioned, you could potentially dynamically decide as soon as a person loads your login form, you're running a little bit of JavaScript in their browser, and it's sending something back that says, something seems a bit off here, show a CAPTCHA. Attackers are going to try to emulate this so that they can fool your detection. And it kind of is, again, one of these cat and mouse games. But again, you're trying to increase the cost for an attacker, making it a bit more difficult so that they don't attack your site. Again, the old, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the guy standing next to you. I just wanted to briefly mention this tool. I saw this at Black Hat this year. This is a really neat tool that uses the SSL handshake negotiation to fingerprint who's making the request. And we've done a little bit of research with this, but it's actually fairly good at telling the difference between a real browser and something that's trying to pretend to be a browser. So we haven't really developed this much yet, but I wanted to throw it out there as really a shout out to Lee that this is a really awesome tool. And we're looking forward to doing a little bit more with it. But another way of identifying real browser versus this is a passive approach, which is what I like, where it actually just uses the negotiation process. You don't actually need to add anything to the browser itself. We can talk more after as well, if you like. And then the other thing is looking at your user accounts themselves. So building up profiles. You've probably all seen things like this on Google, Facebook. Look at your users where they're logging in from. If I always log in from Montreal, and I'm always using Chrome on OS X or an Android phone, just keep track of that somewhere. And if I try to log in and enough of this stuff is different, maybe ask me to do a second authentication. Maybe ask me to do my two-factor auth, even though I might not have had to otherwise. Or verify the account some other way. OK, now I'm going to dive right into one tool that attackers are using. So this is Sentry MBA. The guys at Shape Security did a blog post that kind of gave a little bit of an overview here. I posted the link below, but This is a tool developed by attackers specifically for doing credential stuffing. And it automates a lot of the attack techniques that I've talked about here to bypass some of the defensive techniques that I've talked about here. But it's basically, you get 3 things, and then it'll attack your site. A configuration for that site. And I mentioned there are forums where attackers are actually sharing these things. Here's one where they're attacking. You probably can't read it, but I think this one is netflix.com. So somebody will make a configuration file that says, go to this URL, get this CSRF token, then post the credentials here. Here are the field names. Here are your rate limits. Here are your thresholds. Everything you need to know to run this attack. Then you get a list of dumped credentials, and you can get that from all those places that I mentioned. And then to get the botnet there, you just get what they call a proxy file, but basically a list of IP addresses that are available for you to use. You put in those details, click start, and it starts going after Netflix. Or I think another one here was Spotify. Streaming services seem to be popular. So it's reached the realm of literally anybody can do this. There's lots of tools that make it very, very easy that are actually relatively advanced, so it can bypass some of the techniques that we talked about today. Not all of them, and that's why I think the defense in depth is important. And another thing that Sentry MBA integrates, which I wanted to call out, is even if you've got CAPTCHAs and you're showing them in the right place, there are now services dedicated to solving CAPTCHAs for you. And I believe this one in particular uses a team of low-paid workers who basically, through the integration with a tool like Sentry MBA, the details, Sentry MBA hits the website, grabs the CAPTCHA picture, sends it to somebody in China or wherever. They solve the CAPTCHA, result goes back, solution goes back. And apparently they do it all in, I think, around, on their website, they post the average solution time, but it's something like 8 seconds or something like that. And they've got an API. You can integrate with them. You pay them with Bitcoin. And you just add your API key into Sentry MBA, and now it's bypassing CAPTCHAs as well. So this is a constant battle here. But again, at least you're raising the cost. They have to pay for this now. So it's a little bit more work, more expense on the side of the attacker that they wouldn't be paying otherwise. So it's not like it's a hopeless game. OK, I've only got like very little time left, but I wanted to quickly talk about a tool that I'm putting together. So account takeover, WTF. It's kind of shocking how easy this is. So I wanted to throw up a little, this is kind of like an intentionally vulnerable website, but specifically for credential stuffing. For testing tools like Sentry MBA, you need a site that's preloaded with a bunch of user accounts. And you need a password dump file that is big enough that it kind of gives you a realistic proportion of successful logins to failed logins. So really, this website just kind of automates that. Now, in the spirit of WTF, it's not actually done yet. I'm very sorry. But it will be very soon, and it'll be up there. And you'll be able to use it at ato.wtf. And I'll put it up on GitHub as well for you to deploy it on your own if you want. It's a relatively simple app. I'm going to give you a quick demo on what it looks like. And you'll see why it's not quite ready yet, but just to give you an idea. All right. So this is just a local deployment. But obviously, my design skills are amazing here. This is pure HTML goodness. But it's really just automating. You've got a protected resource on the site. And if you try to log in, it's going to ask you to log in. There's a default user that works, test tests. If you type in that, you're going to log in. Yeah, you logged in. You can log out. But the real thing that I built it for, the reason I'm talking about it, is just its ability to generate a sample leaked credential dump database. So these are very long passwords, but it's set up so that this generates a list of about 1 million or 10 million credentials. And the website that it's backed is pre-configured that 1 in a million of these will successfully log in. So you can use this as your credential dump file for Sentry MBA. And we'll be posting a config file for Sentry MBA as well. But you can point it at this website to play around with Sentry MBA. And it's a platform for us when we start adding things like putting in a CAPTCHA so that we can experiment how Sentry MBA integrates with that death by CAPTCHA service, so that we can learn a bit more about how these attacker tools work and develop better defenses. So it'll be posted up very soon. Apologies, it's not fully available for the talk today, but it'll be up there soon. Get in touch if you're interested in playing with it or like to try it. And I put a few resources. There was a talk earlier. There's a great OWASP project on the Automated Threat Handbook. It goes over in much more detail a lot of these other automated attack techniques on websites. A few other bits on account takeover and credential stuffing in general, and the great OWASP resources on the end there. All of our slides will be posted as well, so you'll be able to get access to all these links after. And with that, any more questions?
All right, thanks, Mike.